Ladies and gentlemen, today we crack open our history books and turn to page 1 to address probably the most trying thing about me making videos about Football Manager, and that's the fact that I call the sport soccer. I dare say, how dare you, sir? Disgrace! Disgrace! Hey, welcome to another video. My name is Zealand, and today we are going to be debunking a myth, a point of contention on Twitch streams when I was with James Lawrence Alcott. Actually, the other day, we were watching the Champions League final on his stream, and the question came up. Somebody was providing punditry. It wasn't even me. They used the word soccer.
The soccer that has been played.
And the contingent of the chat that you would expect to pop up at a moment like this said, well, everything that this person has said is now devalued because they used the word soccer. I thought I'd sit down and make a video that actually explained why in the United States we use the word soccer, and not spitefully, I would like to add. I also get asked this on stream a lot. Why do you call it soccer? Or I'll call the sport soccer, and somebody goes, I mean, they do that in text form. If you want to check out the stream, by the way, it is in the description. You just click the link and a follow. I stream 4 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, explosions. We also have a live channel now, so if you can't make those streams, you can go to the live channel, and within 48 hours of the stream, there will be a video posted of the stream. It's in its entirety. I love words. And I promise you, I'm going to tell the unadulterated, unbiased story. I'm a history major, and I kind of love this stuff. So we're going to dig back into the annals of the sport that is now global and uses around ball and feet, and tell you why in the United States it's called soccer, and in England and most of the rest of the world, it's called football or foosball or football, whatever. And back in this weeds of time, we're going to Freemasons Tavern in London in 1863. The leaders of 12 different clubs sat down and codified the rules of the sport that we would now come to know as soccer or football. This moment was actually the birth of the Football Association. And then you go, whoa, hold on. Clearly, they already knew it was called football. Yeah, what are you Americans doing? In 1863, they called it the Football Association. Well, take your timeline, and we go forward to 1871, when a different group of clubs sat down to codify this medieval game that the English have been playing for a very long time, according to written history, and they codified it a different way in 1871, involving more use of the hands. Sound familiar? This, in 1871, created rugby football. And the Football Association's version, which of course used the feet, was association football. In a study by Stefan Szymanski of the University of Virginia, this is the point where the words were shortened, because who wants to say association football every time you're talking about one sport, and rugby football when you're talking about the other sport? So rugby football was shortened to ruggers, and association football was shortened to soccer. It's in the late 1800s that these two games began to spread throughout the world, particularly the English-speaking world, and different twists were put on the game. As it came over to the United States, a combination of ruggers and soccer was created. Just another variant of the game that was actually fairly similar to the two. Kind of, you know, if you put ruggers up here and soccer down here, this variant ended up right in the middle, and Americans started to call it football. This is a phenomenon that created the need to keep using the word soccer in order to distinguish association football and that set of rules from something else that had already been created in the country that was now referred to as football, because it was basically an amalgamation, which is way too long of a word, so get rid of that. It is part of the rules of football, dating back to medieval times, English medieval times. There are no written medieval times in the United States, and what is now the United States. They didn't have the written language. They did play lacrosse, though, which is a Great sport. Very fun. That's like our sport, I guess, that we invented on this continent. So when the first American football game was played in 1869, it wasn't seen as a revolutionary new sport. It was seen as an American interpretation on the rules that had been brought forward by ruggers and soccer. It was just somewhere else in the middle that, well, Harvard and Rutgers decided that they wanted to use those rules instead. And so that sport then just became football. Obviously, ruggers didn't exactly catch on in the United States, but what you'll notice is that every other country that calls the sport soccer today ended up creating a different sport that took the name football, so that when in the 1980s, yes, it was that late, we're getting there, in the 1980s, when England in particular shifted back to just calling it football, United States, Australia, a few other places kept calling it soccer, because that helped distinguish from a sport that was football that had already been created in that country. Here's where things get really weird. You would expect, after what I just told you, for soccer to have been in use in England up until the 1980s. After all, it's where the term was invented shortly after 1863 to differentiate that set of rules that was created that we now understand as the sport and the different sets of rules that were being created. Well, actually, the United States was really the only place using the term soccer until after World War II. And the explanations on this are a little strange, even though the reason for using it in the United States is now obvious. The US just codified a different set of rules like England had done for ruggers and called it football, since at the time, all of those sports weren't really that different. You just hit people. Szymanski actually speculates that the reason soccer caught back on in England is because of the incredibly large number of American troops that were stationed in England during World War II, and the sport was around, and the references to the different sports were around. And after all, even what we call football, American football, was played in England during World War II. This would create the conditions to want to refer to association football as soccer in order to continue to differentiate. Then why now, in this case, did the term soccer finally fall out of use for good in the 1980s in England? It's actually directly tied to how popular the game was getting in the United States. Or as Szymanski phrases this, I think this is just really interesting. The penetration of the game into American culture, measured by the use of the name soccer, has led to backlash against the use of the word in Britain, where it was once considered an innocuous alternative to the word football. Nobody thought anything of it until the 1980s, when everybody went, well, the Americans are using it. This is, we don't really like them. They're a bit annoying. They're very loud. I feel like we should just say it's football and then let them have their hand egg, per se. So the end of the story is that Britain brought it to the United States with two widely recognized sets of rules, one that became rugby and one that became what we now know today as soccer or football. The United States created its own game in between the two, called it football, because the other one was ruggers and that one was soccer in both countries. And eventually soccer fell out of vogue in England until World War II, and the United States brought it back. And now we're in Britain again. I know I'm using the terms interchangeably. I promise I know the difference. I should be saying Britain every time in this context. And they start calling it soccer again because you can use the word interchangeably with football. But in the 1980s, the United States starts to play more soccer. And there are a lot of Americans, and we're very loud and annoying. And so the British didn't want anything to do with the word anymore because it became associated with Americans. What's the point I'm trying to make? I have no point. I just thought it would be interesting to look this up and then tell you about it. But really, what it's important to understand is that the United States has a very perfectly okay reason to call the sport soccer. We codified a different set of rules for the same game and called it football, just the same as Britain did, and called it rugby, and then brought the word football back to refer to association football from that Freemasons pub in 1863. I think the most important thing to remember is we shouldn't care. It's a sport. We love it. We watch it. Nobody's trying to spite anybody. I promise. Well, there's always that one guy, but everybody has that one guy. This is interesting, right? See, you thought you didn't like history. Then you met this guy. Ha. You wanted me to do a history video. This is like the best thing I could think of. Enjoy. I'll see you on stream.